I want to make sure everybody picks up on this is the commercial realities of a TSMC monopoly are going to be very bad for everybody else. This is what happens when you have a monopoly. Prices are going to go up. Prices are going to go up much more. Ultimately, they will find that they sort of have to raise prices to the point at which everybody, maybe other than Apple and Nvidia, but everybody else certainly is going to have to sit and think very hard about whether or not they want to participate in being at advanced nodes. TSMC as a monopoly will be the effective end of Moore's law.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Circuit. I am Ben Beharin.
Hello, world. I'm Jay Goldberg.
All right, so today we have a multifaceted topic. We know how everybody, not everybody, but we do get feedback about talking about Intel too much, even though they just had earnings. So we thought we would bob and weave, and integrate this more around a central point of TSMC becoming a monopoly. Now, I have a point to make, Jay, and you can tell me what you think about this. Other than Intel manufacturing there, right? Obviously, Intel doesn't have large external customers. I think you could make a strong case that by definition, TSMC has been a monopoly, right? They have raised prices with no consequences, which is generally the definition of a monopoly, and controlled pricing the same way. So while I admit, right, there's this idea of a second or third source, the industry relatively, right, functions around a TSMC monopoly. They're doing what they're doing, and they are not, customers are not choosing outside options. It's sort of like, actually, I think this parallel to like what we talked about NVIDIA, right? Where, hey, everybody says they want an alternative, but yet they're lined up at the door for NVIDIA GPUs. Everybody says they want internal Foundry, yet they're lined out at the door for TSMC and paying TSMC prices. So there's the meta point, right, as to that. Then there is the why are we even having this conversation in the first place? And it's because of some things that Intel said yesterday, which has been the rage of commentary around the future of Foundry. So I'll let you espouse on what did Intel say? Why are we having this conversation about perhaps the increasing likelihood of a TSMC true only foundry monopoly?
So Intel reported earnings yesterday, and it was all going fine. Good revenue, EPS was okay, or was not bad. Everything was going fine, and then Lip-Bu Tan, the CEO, started talking about plans, and he specifically said, "I want to, I don't want to spend capex. I don't want to invest until there's customer demand." And then in the middle of that, somebody looked at, there was SemiAnalysis tweeted out, and other people caught on in the 10Q. It actually says explicitly they will not invest in the 14A process. That's their next process, unless they have an external customer who will sign on for that. And that's when things took a very bad turn for Intel's for people's outlook on Intel. Right? Intel's basically saying they're not going to invest in 14A unless they get a customer who will sign up for it, an external customer. And yeah, and so there's all kinds of implications of what that means, and we can sort of dig into like what exactly is he saying? Does he mean that that's the plan? Is he just trying? Is this some kind of very complicated poker game he's playing?
Right.
Or do we just take him at face value? And in which case, I think I mean, the question I came away with from the call was like, if that's their outlook, just shut down fabs today, sell
That's
them, do
what a
whatever,
lot of people said. Yep. That's
right?
what a lot of people said. Get off the pot if there's any questions whatsoever. Because I do think, a lot of this hinges on, and I think, we can talk about this, that there's multiple ways to interpret this. I saw numerous notes come out from the bankers that kind of said maybe they're being a little bit more conservative. Maybe there's still a way that Intel CPU or Intel products does good enough in the next 2 years that it could be break even on Intel Foundry, and then at which point, or on Intel products, at which point is it worth it for differentiators, for maybe some margin get back that you're not going to get with TSMC. That's, I mean, again, that's possible. I think But I think the concern that most people have really said is, well, if you're not committed right now to
Right.
14A, then why should anybody else be committed to
Right.
14A? And I think
Right.
that's the language that made me really uncomfortable, that I thought was unfortunate. I don't know how they back into that at this point with any degree of like confidence, especially when they've said like this node was supposed to be developed with customer feedback in mind, but yet you don't have customer commits. And now I get it. It's 3 years away. I think last week you and I said maybe 27, and now it's 28, 29.
Yes.
Um, so I, yeah, but I think that's exactly what you said. What your point is, like, if you're not committed, then cut it now and secure your capacity at TSMC. The belief is that that would be a no-brainer to help CPU competitiveness. Um, but I think we all know this. In fact, I was surprised in a lot of these notes that I've read, because for years I've always heard, look, just split Foundry, like make it great. And now it was kind of like people were like, well, there was some benefits to them having
Yeah.
an advanced processor. So I was like, what? Wait a minute. Now you're bummed that this might happen? Like, anyway, that was the back and forth. But the implication of this, again, like we're talking about, is you consolidate really around one foundry that has really all the power. I mean, they, like I said, they may very well now. Maybe nothing changes. Um, but it's kind of like official, right? That there is no that they are a by market driven monopoly.
It's not quite official, only because Intel is does seems incredibly indecisive. And like I said, maybe there's some behind the scenes 5D chess going on. I don't think so, but maybe I'll be open to that. Um, but the situation is basically like you
Five
go
D
on
chess, not
5D
just
chess, yeah,
4D. 5D chess.
5D chess, yeah. You know, uh, it, it's like you go on a blind date with somebody, and you order the other person orders all the expensive stuff, and then you say, let's give this like 5 minutes, see how the date's going, and if not, I'm gonna jump. If this date isn't interesting in the next 5 minutes, I'm gonna leave, and you can pick up the bill. Right? I mean, that's kind of the game that seems that's kind of the impression I got from their call yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, yes. And again, I think the challenge is, um they do lose a lot of differentiation going to TSMC. I mean, and, again, and you're not going to get the same pricing benefits that you could. So I think that was the theory, that there was a benefit to product, to process, that gave them some levers for CPU competitiveness that perhaps others didn't have, especially if they were never going to get AMD as a customer, right? If it was only going to be custom ASICs and government, right? They didn't really have any competitor on their process. So I think that was some of that, sort of gleaning idea of upside. But I keep coming back to this point, which is it just sounds sketchy. And if they're indecisive, who's going to come? Like, why would anybody? And we know these are 2 year commit. Like, you commit to that foundry process 2 years in advance. So the other point, this made me think of, is you're going to see it in their balance sheet if they got a customer for 14A in this approach to just in time manufacturing, which is what Naga had said before. That was his words, right? Just in time manufacturing of wafers. Given the timeline, you would see that in their balance sheet before they even announced a customer. But I mean, I struggle. Like, I'm a customer. I come to you and I say, all right, let's make something together. How much do I need to give you to guarantee you that you're going to have my scale? Because you don't know. You know what I mean? Like,
There you
I
have it,
know
everybody.
TSMC has it. I know TSMC has it. I don't know.
There you have it, everybody. Ben Baharin, of all people, just said Intel is acting sketchy, right?
Well,
Look,
it was, and
I'll tell you the thing that concerned me most out of the whole call, which was full of hits, was David Dinsner, the CFO, said our number one priority is delevering the company, and uh, Intel has a pretty bad track record when it comes to letting CFOs determine the company's number one priority. Right, number one priority. Like a year ago, it was 6 months ago it was delighting customers, and a year ago it was like recapturing process leadership, and now it's back to financial metrics. So yeah.
So let me lay another scenario out to you, right? So just in these, like, what's some game theory here if they really can't continue Foundry? Why? So one, we know that TSMC needs the capacity. So like TSMC would be happy to take extra capacity, especially in Phoenix where this is already happening, because they want to be making gigafabs, right, in one location. That's essentially what Intel said, affirmed, which is like, why are we doing all these foundries all over the place? Let's consolidate and just do these gigafabs like TSMC does. Okay, so that was why they're slowing down or discontinuing other projects. All right, so that's happening in largely Arizona, to some degree Oregon, and Ohio is ready, right, if need be. Um, but let's just say that they can't continue, right? They've got manufacturing assets, they have EUV machines, they have high-NA EUV machines, they have buildings with capacity. I have to imagine that TSMC would want that. So why not float the idea? And I'm completely coming back to the thing that we all thought maybe they shouldn't do. What about like just saying, all right, let's JV this with you, or we'll give it to you for something, but give us some margin back, give us some cost savings back, Intel product cost savings back as a part of that, so that they can essentially secure a more beneficial cost structure for trading of those assets, if you will, or acquiring those assets to help their margins, because that's again something they're struggling with. I know this sounds ugly. I'm just saying, like, in a game theory, why not strike a deal that's financially favorable to you in wafer costs if you trade for services, or do you know what I mean, like sell some of that at a discounted rate?
So I just want to point out that we're starting this conversation on the assumption that they're exiting Foundry. Like that's where we are, everybody. We're the starting point of the conversation is they're exiting. And I think the problem is, so all right, one there's a question of, does TSMC really make use of Intel's footprint?
Sure.
And you think about it, they probably don't need the buildings, they don't need the land. They have a desert to expand into around them. I mean, they have massive amount of space in Arizona. Um, the electricity, I'm sure they have a pretty good electricity deal. So what do they really need from Intel other than some secondhand EUV systems, secondhand semicap equipment
And people.
and people. All right, so they don't. What I think the primary strategic benefit of cutting a deal with Intel would be to to sort of show support for America, right? I think there's
That
considerable
too.
political
That
benefit
too.
in that, but the political calculus is so complicated now. I don't think anybody really knows. I'm not sure the U.S. government is really paying attention to Intel at this point, or advanced semiconductor manufacturing. Um, who knows? So, but I don't think there's a lot that TSMC needs, right? That they couldn't get for very cheap. The other problem too is, if that's the strategy that Intel has, and this is why I don't totally buy the 5D chess piece, is that they if that's the strategy the path they're going down, the way they announced it yesterday just took a lot of
Yes.
their
No,
negotiating power away.
I agree. But that's why I'm saying I agree with you. I don't think there's 5D chess. I mean, I hate, to your point, I hate that we're even having this conversation. This is the first time you've sort of ever heard them say there's no guarantee that we go forward, like from the mouth of management. That's the first time you've heard it. And that's why I'm
Right.
saying, like, all right, then we need to talk about it, because that has not happened before. Um, that in that scenario, I just find it hard to believe that assets, right, $50+ billion or more of assets just disappears. Somebody can use that in
Y-
some function, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
They're there are assets. The problem is when you sell something, you don't want to sell the assets. You want to sell a business, right? And so I think the problem is I don't think TSMC wants any part of the business. They just want the assets,
I would
and
agree.
and they'll get those.
I don't
They'll
think
get those
anybody.
for.
I don't think anybody will. I think they would just want the assets, even if Global Foundries bought them for some reason, which they don't need because they're not going to do leading edge. Um, it's really just the assets.
I think Global Foundries buying this isn't totally crazy, or some kind of complex deal where the two merge isn't crazy because Global Foundries' problem is like they're at a fixed point and they're falling further and further behind.
Right? They can't. Yeah.
If they could buy Intel Foundry at a reasonable price, that gives them another 10 years, 15 years of existence.
Yeah. I mean, again, maybe in that scenario, same thing. Intel helps cooperate it, shares those costs, and then again gets gets weight because you see what I'm getting at. My point is let's again just say that TSMC is the only one leading edge. They can do whatever they want in pricing. That doesn't help anyone's margins, especially if you're not in the GPU or the ASIC business, which Intel is not at this point in time. We don't know. Like you're going to get crunched on CPUs. That's just the reality of it. So to have a healthy, let's just say CPU business, right, which is kind of what Intel's saying, we got to make that healthy before we figure anything else out. Um, Margins are going to be an issue, and they are with Lunar Lake, and and I get that them saying it's because we put memory on package and we're selling that as a at cost with no margin. Fine, fine, I get that, but your margin, like your wafer costs are going up, and you can't charge more for CPUs because of that. Like there's just you can't. So I worry that that's being fabless is my point here is doesn't solve all of Intel's problems. In fact, it would be even worse for AMD if they weren't starting to at least gain some ground in accelerators. If they don't pull that off, it's going to be equally bad for AMD in CPU pricing.
Oh yeah, I mean we haven't talked much about product side, but that was very clear. The Intel numbers were good because of one, it was tariff pull forward, and then two, they're able to hold on to share because they're dropping pricing in data center CPU. There's a price war going on in data center CPU, and that's why they're. And so I think it gets harder and harder for them to hold the line in client, which is pretty much propping up their results right now because the, the they have they haven't bombed pricing there yet, and they probably won't have to, but like there is that risk that they bomb pricing and then everything falls apart.
All right, so let's talk about the implications then of everybody else. The TSMC monopoly, if it happens, what does that mean for everybody else? And I'll say a couple things, right? I got people have made like some points. And this will be a national, a U.S. point, because this week we had the Winning in AI summit somewhere in Washington near the White House that Trump spoke at, and Jensen was there, and Lisa was there, and there was some stuff in there about manufacturing, and people sort of always say, well, TSMC manufactures here, so it is being made on U.S. soil. The difference is that is not a U.S. company, and so there's an implication that there will not be a US company at the leading edge, which I think bears some risk. Maybe, it doesn't, but if China does ever decide to take over Taiwan, I don't think they would, but let's just say there's a small chance that they do. You're host, right? You've lost your ability at that point. So there's a hedge there, part risk that I consider. So there's the national point I'm making, and then there's the everybody else who makes it TSMC in Taiwan, um, or uses Taiwan, right, or TSMC in general. So anyway, broader topic, the rest of the industry. What could a monopoly mean?
I think I think people need to be take to think through this very, very seriously. And I don't think many CEOs have. Because to your point, like when we talk about Foundry and TSMC, it very quickly gets wrapped up in politics, which is, I think, confusing to everybody. But CEO, it's like very hard to plan your business with all these big geopolitical uncertainties. I want to make sure everybody picks up on this is the commercial realities of a TSMC monopoly are very going to be very bad for everybody else, right? And TSMC is a great company. I don't think they're going to do evil, but it's just
Right.
that this is what happens when you have a monopoly. Prices are going to go up. Prices are going to go up much more, and it will be entirely up to TSMC's discretion. But ultimately, they will find that they sort of get have to raise prices to the point at which everybody, maybe other than Apple and Nvidia, but everybody else certainly is going to have to sit and think very hard about whether or not they want to participate in the being at advanced nodes, right? Yeah, and there's mitigating factors like we'll do more chiplets, but like ultimately, TSMC as a monopoly will be the effective end of Moore's law, right? Because at some point, not tomorrow, but 5 years down the road, probably 7 years down the road, TSMC pricing will get so high that company like say Qualcomm, big company, lots of volume, they're going to say, you know what, we don't need to go to the next node.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Right? We're going to stay on the. We're going to stay on the, and that will be bad for consumers. Like at that point, our devices will not be as exciting. We're going to lose Moore's laws for consumers. But
I
that's
mean,
where
I
this is
think,
headed.
to be honest with you, I mean, I hear you hear shades of that today. I mean, I've seen reports that people speculated whether or not Apple would really go to 2 nanometer, right? When prices are what they were, and if you're not going to get the performance gains, why do it, right? And the cost doesn't make it worth it. So I think you're already having that conversation right now, and you're right, right? It only gets worse when wafer costs come up. Really, right? The only people that can justify it are high ASP, so again GPUs, maybe ASICs, and high margins. These people living in the 60s to 70%. If you're a 30-40% margin CPU business, and that's a lot of people. Intel was at what, 36, 37, right, this last quarter? Maybe 34, I can't remember, but something like that. You cannot absorb wafer costs going up the way they are, right, in this dynamic. So, I agree with you. I mean, I think some of Intel's messages was like, look, guys, you can't just use us as negotiating leverage to TSMC and then not actually work with us. Like we can't, it's not sustainable, right? So if you do really want balance, you've got to commit. And I think part of this was just telling the truths, right, to the industry. And like you said, people need to weigh this, and if that freaks them out, right, in any capacity, they should at least do what they can to help Intel float this, um, to ensure that the monopoly reality scenario isn't the one that plays out.
Yeah. Yeah. So Doug O'Loughlin at Semi Analysis put out a note today. That's essentially his take on the Intel call was essentially what you're saying. Same thing, which is forcing everybody else to make a decision, like to think through this. And it's very tough. And we've talked about this before. Imagine you're Cristiano at Qualcomm, right? And I'm not picking on him. He's got a big business at TSMC. He has to sit down and think about like what he needs for his business today. He's got Wall Street pressuring him quarter to quarter. He's got his own team, like they want to use TSMC tools. They're familiar with it. It's very, very hard for him to say, all right, we're gonna change strategy. We're gonna like bite the bullet. We're gonna spend hundreds of millions of dollars to get up onto familiar with Intel's tools and do that. It's a lot of money, and that money will come at the expense of something else. So he has to be willing
Yes.
to sort of sacrifice near-term margins, and some other important project will have to go by the wayside in order to be able to commit to going to Intel. And again, I'm not picking on him. It's like you could see, like even if he were, you know, super patriotic and really, really wanted to see America have manufacturing, advanced semiconductor manufacturing, it's a very hard, it's almost an impossible decision for him to go down that path, right?
Right.
And
And
that
it's not a
and
half
I'm
commit. You can't
and it's
half
not
commit.
you
Yeah.
can't half commit, right? And it's true for AMD, and it's true for Broadcom too. All these big companies. I think the one group that really, really needs to pay attention to this the most, though, are the people building custom ASICs. Google, Amazon,
I
Microsoft,
agree. Agreed.
OpenAI, and they don't have the negotiating leverage with TSMC, so they're the ones who are going to get $100,000 wafers first. And the problem is, like Sam Altman is like got so many other things he's got to balance. Like, oh, now he has to be worried about semiconductor strategy. I mean, it's very remote from his day to day, and so something needs to be the forcing function to get all these CEOs to realize that, like, hey, this very remote long-term thing, it's 5 years away, 6, 7 years away, where it's going to matter to you. You need to be thinking about it today, and just and I don't know
Yeah.
what that is, and I'm worried I there isn't one other than Lip-Bu saying, hey guys, maybe we're not going to be here.
Yeah. Whatever I think is super interesting that just hit me as we were talking. So let's just go back to AMD for a minute. So AMD's one ability to have architecturally developed a leading product performance wise that can command a premium is really what saved them here. If they did not do that and they had to compete on price, they would not survive this price hikes from TSMC in wafer costs. And and I say that as, again, right, some form of a like your ASP matters, your costs matter, to exactly what you said in the ASIC guys. These are largely just CapEx spends for them for their workloads, right? For their data centers, for software that they run. And at some point in time, if those costs go up, it actually becomes cheaper for you to make a GPU, to use a GPU, to be honest with you, if you can't keep up, right? Those kinds. So they need to be concerned on their internal workload priority strategy, the margins that they're trying to get or save in performance or vector. At some point, that goes away if you're paying too much for an ASIC, right? If your ASIC is
Yep.
not just $1 billion, it's now $2 billion to tape out an ASIC. Like that, you can't. You're not. You might as well just buy GPUs. Like you're.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that this whole move towards heterogeneous compute, away from everything being a CPU, that was the first coping mechanism we had for dealing with the slowdown in Moore's law, right? We can't rely on CPUs getting 50% faster every year, so we gotta maximize the things that we care about more. So that leads to heterogeneous compute and GPUs and ASICs, and but with a TSMC monopoly, then even those strategies
Yeah,
start to
absolutely.
get diluted.
100%. And I
Uh,
to what you said, I just don't think people have wrestled with this reality.
yeah, people, it's hard. I understand why it's hard, but here's what I would suggest. I think everybody needs to go out and do this. If you do strategy at a chip company, sit through and build a scenario analysis, just a simple thing. Plug in what your product roadmap looks like with $100,000 away from TSMC, right? What does that do to your roadmap? What changes does that have to make to your roadmap if that's the pricing assumption you build in? Because it's not. I would say that's a likely outcome at this point.
Yeah. I mean, Hawk at Broadcom's got to be freaking about this. That's going to eat your margins. He loves his margins, and
Yeah,
your margins go in
yeah.
increasing wafer costs.
I mean, we talked about this like 6 months ago, and I actually did some math around it, and I can't remember the exact details, but I think it's at $55,000 a wafer, it starts to get a little tough for people. You still have margin, and at $70,000 a wafer, you don't go to the next node, right? And we're already touching $50,000 wafers for N2. So we're close to people's link. So everyone go out and build that sensitivity analysis to to wafer costs on your margins, and what that means not just for your, abstractly, but what does that actually mean for your roadmap? Go ask the architects,
Yeah.
the chip design architects, what if the wafers are this expensive? What do you do? And a lot of them are going to come back and say, we can't do anything. We just, right? We're
Yeah.
stuck where we are.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. Um, all right. I think we've covered the gamut and made the point we want, which is do not let TSMC become a monopoly, because the entirety of most people's semiconductor business might very well fall down. It might
Yeah.
break in some capacity. So that wouldn't be good. and uh, yeah, some
I mean, the thing I want to close on is that there are commercial solutions to this, right? I've been bound to this drum for a long time. I wish the government would have done it, but I guess it's up to you and me. But like Qualcomm, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, Tesla, go sit down in a room together, find 10 billion, 15 billion dollars, collectively commit to Intel, um, buy a 15-20% stake in it. It's, that's $15 billion among those companies, gets $15 billion, gets Intel to 14A. That's like pocket change. It's like change in like their sofas for those companies, right? It's not that much money, and it's doable. There is a commercial
yep,
solution here, and
yes,
people should take them up on it.
yes, agree. Well, the drama continues, so we will be active watchers of the unfolding of this soap opera that continues to be the foundry industry for Intel. So,
Yeah.
all right. Thanks for listening, everybody. And we appreciate your time. And we will talk to you next week.
Thank you, everybody. Tell your friends.